Welcome to the second semester, first episode of our Career Accelerator lecture series. We're pleased to have Marv Nuss with us today. Excited to have Marv Nuss talking on communication, and we'll have a little more on that in just a second. First, let me say I'm Bob Parsons, working with the School of Engineering on this series, and glad to be back again with you this semester. This is the first of 4 talks we plan to have this semester. We'll have about one every 4 weeks. What you can expect if you haven't been with us before is this will go an hour or so, typically, maybe a little longer. You're welcome to, if you need to drop out, that's fine because we are recording this. So you will have access to the recording both through Zoom, and then in a few days, it'll be posted on the School of Engineering webpage. We want you to ask questions. The question time is many times the best part of the program, or one of the great times of the program where we get to interact with our speaker. You can do that by submitting questions through the chat. I'll be collecting those throughout the hour and then kind of grouping those and asking those questions at the end. So we look forward to your questions. With that, let me introduce our speaker, Marv. Marv Nuss is the owner of Nuss Sustainment Solutions, an aircraft engineering consulting and training business. He has consulted and or trained on certification, continued airworthiness, and aircraft research on 4 continents. Marv has 48 years of experience in aircraft fatigue, damage tolerance, continued airworthiness, and certification. He's worked with the FAA Part 23, 25, and 27 in Army, Navy, and Air Force projects. He retired from the FAA in December of 2011 after more than 20 years in a variety of engineering and management roles. And he was involved in a broad spectrum of certification and continued airworthiness issues for all sizes and classes of aircraft. Prior to joining the FAA, Nuss worked for 18 years as a structural fatigue analyst at Bell Helicopter and McDonnell Aircraft Companies. He was involved in several design, in-service, and test projects on helicopters and fighter aircraft. While with McDonnell, he also worked in Spain on an aircraft design certification team. He earned his BS with us here in aerospace engineering in 1973 and did graduate study in engineering mechanics at the University of Texas, Arlington. He is an active pilot and serves on KU's Aerospace Engineering and the School of Engineering advisory boards. And he was inducted into the Aerospace Engineering Alumni Honor Roll in 2015 and the School of Engineering Distinguished Engineering Service Award in 2019. So with that, and Marv is here to speak with us about communication. And we're greatly looking forward to that. So Marv, if you want to share your screen and take it away.
Okay, is that working? There we go.
Yes, we can see that.
Minimize that so that doesn't bother me. Okay, Bob, thanks for the introduction. Communication skills can make you stand out. That's going to be the topic today. I really enjoyed the fall speakers on this lecture series, and if I'm not mistaken, I think every one of them touched on the importance of communication. Whether they were talking about leadership or teams, whatever it was, communication came up. And so that spurred me to think, okay, I can give them a little bit more of the details about good communication skills. This presentation is an extension of a presentation I put together and have made to KU Aerospace Engineering students a few times. And it's based on a technical writing workshop that we held at the FAA many, many years ago. So hopefully some of the tips will help you improve your writing skills. And I've added some information on good oral communication as well. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in this afternoon. I was joking with Bob and Amy before we got started that usually when I do my aerospace colloquium, it seems like the weather is 75 degrees and everybody wants to be outside. So nobody wants to be outside on with 12 degrees outside. So I guess this is as good excuse as any to sit in on the lecture. Okay, so communication. We're going to talk about oral communication and written communication. And I'm going to break those down into what I consider informal communication. So informal oral communication, what we do typically in meetings with our team, on the phone, Listening is an important aspect of that. And then formal oral communication, of course, is going to be presentations and speeches, things like that. I'll talk at length about written communication, informal. Informal is typically going to be emails and maybe text and social media, but I'm not going to dwell on that an awful lot. There can be informal reports that would be considered informal, but certainly reports typically with numbers on them, published documents, that would be what I would consider formal writing. So we'll talk about all four of those. This is just a guess on my part, but I'm thinking that 90%, probably more, of our communication is oral, and a vast majority of that is informal communication. So you want to make it good. And of course, formal communication in the form of a presentation like this is a chance for you to shine, because that's probably your audience is going to be managers, or it's going to be professional colleagues outside of your organization. So make time to make a good first impression and really stand out. So that's why oral communication is so important. And then the rest of our communication is written. A majority of that's going to be informal, mainly in the form of, professionally in the form of emails. But remember that a formal written communication or formal written documents is a permanent reflection of you. It's got your name on it, and that could last for a really long time, maybe forever. So that's another way of breaking down what I'm going to be talking about today. So let's start off with informal communications. We use these skills all the time, both in our professional and our personal life, whether we're in a team meeting or whether we're just talking with someone. But think about that. More than half of our oral communication should be listening. If we're not listening so much, then that means we're not being as good a communicators as we could be. So remember that. And good listening is critical to good communication. How do you do that? Well, you be an active listener. Your body language is important. Posture, eye contact, and no distractions. In this day and age, your biggest distraction is your cell phone. Guilty as charged. There's probably people right now out there multitasking on their cell phone, and it's easy for you to get drug away from what the speaker is talking about and pay attention to your cell phone more. You're not an active listener when you're doing that. So I certainly understand why we do it, but try not to let that be a driver in your communication, especially when you're in small groups and you're a one-on-one. Put the cell phone aside and don't let that temptation get the best of you. It's also best to ask questions to make sure you understand. You listen to the person, especially in the technical world, because much of our conversation is complex. So don't be afraid to ask questions to make sure you understand, whether that's over the phone, on a one-on-one meeting, or in a team situation. Don't neglect simple face-to-face communication. You know, this day and age, we've been separated. Many of us aren't in a working environment. But when we get back to that, the work environment, when we get back to that, don't be afraid to walk down the hall to talk to somebody when you've got a question, rather than picking up a phone or sending them an email. Face-to-face communication is always good. Same way with making a telephone call versus an email. And when you think about it, the time you take to put together a good email might be 10 or 15 minutes. Think of all the conversation you can have with someone over the phone in 10 or 15 minutes. That can be more efficient because it's interactive, it's two-way, and there's reduces the chance of misunderstanding if you simply pick up the phone and talk to someone rather than an email. If you do need to document that phone conversation, you can always do that with a follow-up email or a simple, a simple summary written down and then saved. I'm going to now turn to formal presentation or formal communication, which is presentations and speeches. And as I said at the outset, this is an opportunity for you to stand out. In order to be a good presenter, you first need to know your audience. Are you going to be talking to management? Are you going to be talking to engineering colleagues, either in a team setting or maybe outside your organization, like at a conference? Is it going to be technical, or your audience is going to be largely non-technical people, maybe people from the business side of your organization? And that's all going to gear how you want to put your presentation together. And then what's the purpose? Is your purpose to inform? Is it to persuade, or is it to educate? And so that's going to gear how you want your slides to appear and what you want to say. It's going to be what your audience, and then what's your purpose. So keep those in mind when you put your presentations together. You're going to see this list of the process of preparing material when I get into the writing side as well. But planning is important. Planning and organizing. Do a lot of that, and it will make your writing aspect of putting those slides together. It'll make that much easier. And then this loop of evaluating and revising. Even this presentation that I've got going today, I've revised and edited. I made a minor tweak yesterday, as a matter of fact. So you spend some time here to make it as good as you can. And then, of course, you're going to have organizational approval if required, especially if you're going to be taking it outside. So always allow plenty of time for each of these steps. Don't be rushed and try to if you throw your presentation together in a haphazard fashion, typically that's probably the way it's going to be delivered, and that's the way it's going to be recognized by the audience. Don't make your slides too busy. Use your slide content as an outline for what you want to say. So fewer words, and make them triggers for, okay, this is the point I want to make, or the 2 or 3 points on this slide. Photos, videos, graphics, and charts are wonderful. So use those when you can. As an example, you see here, I've added a photo. This is a photo I took up in Fairbanks, Alaska, many years ago. And yes, that is a wolf tied to the strut of an airplane. So if you've got a catchy photograph that is applicable to your presentation, include that, because it'll keep your audience engaged and keep them paying attention. So you don't want to overdo that with silly photos or things like that too much. But if you've got a pertinent photo, put it in there. Another thing that you really need to be conscious of, especially for us engineers, is how many equations you want to put in your presentation. Now, that's going to depend on the audience, of course. But I found that an overabundance of equations in a presentation makes the audience, sometimes it's difficult to understand that presentation. So I recommend that you keep your equations to a minimum. And remember to think about the audience. Now, I've got one slide that actually has a couple of equations on it toward the end of my presentation. So it's okay to use equations. You have to, but just be careful of what you want your audience to absorb. Of course, you want to make your slides to be written as well as you can. You want good flow, slide to slide. So as you put the presentation together and you go through it multiple times, you may say, well, I need to move slide three closer to the end, or I need to move slide closer to the front, slide 10 closer to the front. Make your slides easy to read. Think font size and color, and I like to go with the old traditional white background and dark text, and make sure you've got plenty of white space. If you're going to go with a dark background and a light font, then make sure that that's going to be easily seen at the back of a room where you might be giving a lecture or presenting a paper. I like to use dark text, and then I use good old crimson and blue for things that I want to especially highlight. I make it a point to stay away from purple. I don't like purple. That's for schools that are further west in Kansas. Minimal amount of text. You want the audience to be listening to you more than reading your slides. So keep that in mind. And for the benefit of the audience, spell out your acronyms. I've got a slide on that a little bit later, so I'll talk about that later. And then always use correct grammar and spelling. Use the spell checker in Microsoft Word for PowerPoint. There's nothing more embarrassing than getting up there in the middle of a slide and realizing you have a typo or some bad grammar. Always acknowledge your other contributors, either the beginning or the end of your presentation. And then I like to prepare speaker's notes, and I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But this is where the bulk of here's what I'm going to talk about, is where I put it, is in my speaker's notes. And then note that many of the tips that I'm going to provide later for working documents also apply to here, because these are words, or this is a written document that you're going to be using to speak with. Many years ago, when I was a young pup engineer, my boss told me, before I gave my first presentation to an outside group, simply tell them what you'll tell them, and then tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So have a good opening about, hey, introduction, here's what we're going to talk about, an outline maybe of what you're going to talk about, then talk about all of that stuff, and then wrap it up with a good solid conclusion. Don't exceed your allotted time. I've got a stopwatch running right now to help keep me on pace, especially if you're delivering a paper to a conference. You've got a half an hour. The last thing you want to do is spend way too much time on your first 10 slides and then find out you've only got 5 minutes left to make the points that you want to make to your audience. And the best way to do that is practice, practice, practice. So run through your slides multiple times and see, okay, am I going to be within my allotted time, or am I going to have to cut some stuff out? If at all possible, save time for questions, and be prepared for those questions. And when you get a difficult question, don't be afraid to say, I don't know. That is much better than trying to snow somebody and bluff your way through, because typically somebody in the audience is going to be aware of that, and you just may be digging yourself a hole. And as I said before, you acknowledge other contributors, both on your slides, and then mention that during your delivery. Don't just read your slide content to your audience. I've been seeing presentations where each bullet may include 2 or 3 lines, and the speaker reads that, and then he reads the next bullet, and so on. That's the easiest way to lose your audience. Your audience will get disengaged right away. However, if you have quotations or citations, you really should read those to make sure you get those right. This is where my speaker's notes come in handy, because I read my speaker's notes over and over and over. Now, I suggest that you don't read from them, because here again, that comes across more monotone, and it's easy to lose the audience when you do that. And if you're quoting numbers, though, use those notes to make sure you get your numbers right. Try to speak in a conversational tone. Don't worry about if you slip up and flub a little bit now and again, because that happens in normal conversation as well. Show a little bit of your personality if you can. A little humor is good, but I suggest that you don't overdo it or force it. Sometimes people force the humor, and it's, like telling a joke at the very beginning. Well, that's taking time away from your presentation. So like I said, a little humor is good, but don't overdo it. And then keep your language clean. That you're going to see, I emphasize that a lot in my presentation today, because that's a stickler with me. You don't know who in the audience you may turn off if you're using foul language. Okay, so now let's move to written communication. Types of writing that you'll do: informal, text, and social media. I stay away from social media. I don't understand why people in professional settings say some of the things they say in social media. Makes no sense to me. It seems to me that can only get you in trouble. You're going to send a lot of emails that are informal, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then there are some informal reports that I would consider as informal written communication. This slide is from Pat Oenbring's presentation in the fall. And when he talked about this slide in his presentation, it was so impactful to me, because it summarized so much that I took a screenshot of it, and I said, I'm going to include that in my presentation. I've got Pat's permission to include it here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. This may be one you may want to take a screenshot of or come back to later. But it really breaks down what's the best form of communication for the situation. And I'm going to drop down here to the bottom, because these are really important. When you're dealing with interpersonal problems, interpersonal relationships, things like that, the very best communication is in person or maybe over the phone. But this is the sort of thing you really don't want to get in the habit of doing with emails or doing it at all. So remember that. If you're dealing with sensitive situations, the very best is person to person, whether that one-on-one or in a team setting. Some of the writing that you'll do, your formal writings that you'll do, or some emails I would consider to be formal because you'll be doing an introductory to someone you may not know. It may have a lot of information in it. Certainly internal memos and outside letters, briefing papers, status reports, white papers. Those are all what I consider formal writing. Some informal internal reports would be formal. And then certainly any report that's going to be submitted for contract purposes or certification, if they're going to have a company number on them, that sort of thing, those are certainly formal reports to be published. Published technical papers, informational articles, speeches, that's all what I would consider formal writing. This may be, if there's one takeaway from my presentation that I want you to have, this is the one. Your subject is complex. We as engineers are deal with a complex subject. So when we're writing, by its nature, it's complex. So you don't need to make it any more complex. So keep your writing as simple as you can. Your goal should be to make it easier for the reader to comprehend. So the easier it is for the reader, then that's the better that your writing is. And you as readers of technical information, you know when you see good writing. And you probably know when you see poor writing. So you want to keep that in mind when you're the author. Even though Hemingway wasn't a technical writer, I really like this quote of his. I think a lot and I write very little. And that's the way we should approach our writing. We shouldn't save it to the very end of the project and then try to smash it together because it's probably going to want to be any good. It won't be any good. We want to think a lot. And that's going to make our writing a whole lot easier. Why is technical writing so important? We do a lot of procedures. We do a lot of process, and we have to document those. So we're going to have instructions and procedures. And if you do those poorly and they're misunderstood, it can cause costly engineering delays or rework of manufacturing parts, things like that. So it can be costly. And having worked for the FAA for 20 years, I have seen written maintenance instructions that were not interpreted properly by the mechanics that led to fatal accidents. So this is serious business. It's serious business when you have poor writing that's conducive to being misunderstood. It can lead to bad things happening. You want clear explanations. If you're preparing a document for a busy manager, they don't have a lot of time to pour through the document and reread a document 2 or 3 times to try to understand it. So make it clear and concise. And I've been a reviewer of proposals. They're asking the FAA for us to give them grants. And I've read through poorly written proposals that were so poor, it's like, if this person can't explain what they're trying, the project they're going to work on, and they want money from us, should I expect anything better from this technical capability? And side beside that, I've got a grant or a grant proposal that's very well written. Well, where do you think I'm going to lean? I'm going to lean to the proposal that's very, very written very well. So that's the importance of that good writing in other different ways. Okay, some informal communication, emails. And I think this is one that Kyle Mathis mentioned in his presentation last fall. Use a concise and specific subject line, especially if you're sending this to your bosses. They're going to get 100 emails a day, maybe. So you want something that's going to be real catchy that they're going to want to open up right away. And then you're going to want to follow that up with a concise and specific subject line. Okay. So that they read that first sentence or two, they want to continue reading rather than saying, oh, I don't have time for this, let me go to the next email. So state your purpose right away. Be an attention grabber and grab their interest. They want to keep reading. Don't get in the habit of using poor grammar, spelling, and sentence construction. So keep that in mind when you're writing. Always check for that. Use the spell check if you can. What I do sometimes is I actually will craft the email as a Word document, so I can move it around, get it to look the way I want, and then I'll simply cut and paste that into Outlook and send it as an email. We've all been guilty of sending a message before we really should have. So read every message at least once before you hit send button, and for two reasons. Sometimes I've hit the send button and 15 minutes later it dawned on me that I forgot a really key point and I have to send an additional email. Or sometimes it's sensitive material and maybe I haven't addressed that subject really the right way. And I think, man, I really shouldn't have said that. So if you have the time, let the document age for a few hours. And it's amazing what happens if you let it age overnight. You'll come back to it the next morning and you may have a completely different outlook about how you want to say, or maybe some points that you want to say. And then again, never use offensive language. And remember, writing, even informal writing, is permanent. So keep that in mind. Some more tips on that. Some emails will be significant transfers of information. So you're going to be going to be attaching documents. They could be Excel spreadsheets, they could be Word documents, whatever. Explain what's in each of those documents so that the reader can look at that and say, okay, this is a document I really need to take a look at right away, as opposed to, okay, I'll come back to that. Or maybe I'll just simply download this document and read a little bit later. Keep these emails as professional. Treat them like writing like a report. So don't get in the habit of using shortcut spelling, slang, things like that. If your email is a simple, short explanation, keep it as concise and professional as you can. Again, no shortcut spelling and slang. And if your message starts getting long, and think about this as a reader, if your email is longer than one screen, or certainly two screens, where the reader is going to start getting impatient about getting to the bottom, that may be time to take the details of that information and put it into a Word document, attach it, and then merely explain what's in the Word document. Make it easy for the reader to keep engaged. Okay, some thoughts on email messages. Many of your email messages are going to be informal, quick notes to colleagues and friends. It's okay for those to be less than professional standard because in the interest of time, that may be okay, but don't get in the habit of shortcut spelling, slang, and poor grammar. Okay, it's okay to put a little bit of humor in those emails, but be careful with that. Be careful with that. Typo or poor writing isn't the end of the world, and it's still a good idea always to reread your message before the send button. Even for some short message to somebody you know, stay away from the profanity and the suggestive language. That's never acceptable. And it goes for any professional writing, but don't let your standards slip, even for short notes. And remember, emails are company property and can be monitored, and emails are permanent. And I'll tell you a real quick story. I wish I had time for the whole story, but many, many years ago, I sent a real short email to a friend of mine who worked for another company. This happened to be 3 or 4 days before we were getting ready to go into a congressional government shutdown. And I asked this person if he could use me coming down to work for him for a little while I was out of work. And I meant it as a joke. Well, lo and behold, 7 years ago, I was giving a deposition for a civil lawsuit. In the middle of that deposition, one of the lawyers asked me if I'd ever sought employment with that company, and I said no. And then he showed me my email where it said, "Hey, you got any work for me to come down there and work?" As it turns out to be, it was a minor point because I recognized right away that it was okay. It was prior to the shutdown, and I was trying to make a joke. Everybody in the deposition laughed when I said that, except for the plaintiff's lawyer. So here was a situation where a simple short little email, which was part of government employee freedom of information request, that email got called into that freedom of information request and was a little bit embarrassing for me, and it could have been a lot more embarrassing, if it had even been worse. So here it was, a 7-year-old innocent email comes back to bite me. So keep that in mind. Okay, the following slides are slides that are more about the mechanics of technical writing, and they may make a good checklist for some good tips for writing. You saw this when I talked about my oral presentation. Plan, organize, write, evaluate in this loop, and then organizational approval certainly for formal writing. Again, know your audience. Why am I writing this document? Why is the reader reading this? They've got a reason for that. What do they know? Are you gearing this to people who already know as much about the subject as you, or are you gearing this to people who may not know near as much about the subject? And then what do you want them to learn from this? What are they going to take away when they finish reading that document? Especially if you're writing documents for management, how much time does the target audience have to read the document? If they're pressed for time and you know they don't have much time, then you want to keep that document short and easy to read. What questions might arise? If you can think of questions that the reader might ask, then answer them right straight away. Don't wait for them to come back to you. Answer them in your document, and then make sure that your takeaway points are very clear. Make sure that they are very clear. So that's the planning. Organizing, outline your ideas or themes. Start grouping. Word processor makes this so easy. Start categorizing things with titles or headings. Start organizing things, cutting and pasting, moving things around. You're going to start developing what I want my opening paragraphs to look like, or if it's a longer document, what I'm going to be putting into my executive summary. And then similarly for your conclusion, for your concluding remarks. And by the way, I like to save my executive summary. I like to write that last after I've written all the other stuff. Then I can go back and writing the exec summary is usually pretty easy. And then make sure that you've covered all of your intended ideas. Write a draft. That's how you start. Okay, and everybody's had writer's block, and you think, oh man, where do I begin? The way I do it is I begin with what's easiest to write. And let's say you're documenting a 10-step process, and you were most heavily involved in process number 7, and you've got that down pat. Well, knock it out. You start. The main thing you want to do is get your ideas in from your brain to your fingers to the keyboard to the screen, and just start banging keys with what's easiest to write. And what you're going to find is that, okay, I know step 7 now. I also know step 3 pretty well, and it's going to start breaking down all the other aspects of this document that you want to write. First time through, don't strive for perfection. Make sure that you're getting your thoughts onto your screen for you. So don't worry about grammar and spelling yet. Save that for later. Don't struggle for best phrasing either. If you find that you're still having to search for ideas or data, you need to go back to the planning and the organizing stage. Write, edit, revise. That's that loop. And this is really a hierarchy of how best to approach that. How does it appear? Does it flow well? Does the document, does it make sense as you go from paragraph to paragraph to paragraph? Is it in logical order? That's the next one. And then you get down to word and sentence assessment. So this is where you're looking for your sentence structure and your good grammar. And then your last reading is for typos and misspelled words. I had a grammar guru tell me one time the best way to look for that is to read the document backwards. I can't do that. That's too difficult for me. But that's where you certainly want to make sure that you look for your typos and your misspelled words. A second set of eyes is going to be extremely helpful. They don't have to be extremely knowledgeable about the situation, but they can help you with layout, main point, sentence structure, certainly grammar, typos, and spelling. It's essential for team projects. So if you can, have somebody put a second set of eyes on it, and if possible, make it on a sheet of paper rather than reading on a computer screen. I've got 10 keys for clear writing. I'll go through these. I won't dwell on them real big. We've already talked about this. Put your conclusions up front. Make that purpose clear. Summarize or list key points. Write in your own professional voice. So if you don't talk with a lot of big words, then you probably shouldn't be writing that way either. Step number 3, especially if you're writing briefing papers for management, be concise, use simple words, and you don't need to add extra words because what we write is already complicated. Repeat keywords. That helps reinforce your main ideas to the reader. Beware of cliches, jargons, acronyms, and throwaway phrases. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that a couple of slides. Headings are wonderful. Use the power of the word processor to break that document up. Keep your sentences relatively short, 15 to 20 words. And this is hard for us engineers because our subjects are so complex. The pet peeve word that I use too much is the simple word that. And I'll actually do a word search for that when I'm finished with a document. And I typically can cut out probably 25 to 35% of the time I use that word. Another rule of thumb I use personally, and I use this religiously, is for a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, a 12-point font, if I have a sentence that goes over 3 lines, so if it spills over into the 4th line, I force myself to break that up because that for the reader, long sentences, especially if they're technical, are too hard to understand. So sentences over 4 lines, break it up, or over 3 lines, break it up into 2. Keep your paragraph short. Longer documents, 10 lines is a long paragraph. Shorter documents, paragraphs should be even shorter. And then don't be afraid to use bullets, numbers, or letters. They've done studies that show that ragged right margins are easier to read. So I recommend that. However, if you're preparing a paper for publish, they may prescribe formats that require right justified. So always use the prescribed format. But ragged right is easier to read. Okay, I've got one slide on one-page management briefings, and you're probably at some point in your career are going to have to do this. This may be the hardest thing to write because what we as engineers, you're going to write that briefing paper and it's a page and a half. That's okay. No, if the managers want 1 page, that's what you should give them. So you've got to get to your point right away. Every word counts. So there are no extra words. Look for sentences that you can remove, but don't do it at the expense of white space. So don't say, oh, I'm just going to put it all in one big long paragraph. Your boss is not going to appreciate that. So keep your white space. Make it easy for the reader to understand the issue. One-page management briefing papers are supposed to be easily read and quickly read, so keep them that way. If they need more info, that means that you've piqued their interest and they're going to ask, and that's totally okay. And then you can provide more info. Okay, which document would you rather read, the one on the left or the one on the right? So let's say you're reading through a 20-page document and you turn the page and you see this monster on the next page. Subconsciously, you're thinking, oh, brother, I've got to slog through the 17-sentence paragraph. I took these exact words and I broke them up into what you see here on the right. How much more appealing that is with the white space. I even found an opportunity to have a short list. If you turn the page and you see this page, this is more inviting to read. And so you're going to be more conducive to keep on reading through that. And I'm sure you've seen documents like that. As a reader, don't write them. Don't write them. Always reflect professionalism, strictly avoid colloquialism. You know, the cows are out of the barn. We hit a home run with this project, things like that. There's no place for that in technical writing. Don't use shortcut words. Absolutely don't fall into the trap of texting abbreviations and things like that. Save your humor for your creative writing. There's no place for humor in technical writing, and absolutely no place for slang, profanity, or sexual suggestive language. When possible, writing should be gender neutral. There and they, he/she is another way to approach that. This is another good one. You may want to take a screenshot of this. Avoid nouniness, where we turn verbs into nouns. The biggest one, we talk this way a lot. We make a decision where we really decided. So you can use less words, it's easier to read. And how you can recognize those is by the ends of these words where we've taken a verb and we've turned it into a noun. You really don't need to do that all the time. You can minimize it. What you're doing is creating a short word. You're making a long word out of that short word. Another one is gobbledygook. And here, this is another one you may want to come back to. My pet peeve is this one right here, with regards to. I see that all the time. I see that in newspapers. Simply regarding. It's easier to read, and you're shortening that sentence. So there are some other examples there that you can come back to later. You got to be careful with these, the homophones and words that mean the same. We've all made this mistake, the possessive it versus the contraction. Us aerospace engineers, we aerospace engineers, hanger and lightning are two that we get mixed up too often. We've all made this mistake as well, principle and principle. The word processor won't catch these, so you need to be careful to make sure that you're using the right word, the right definition, and the right application. Your high school English rules, remember those. Active voice is easier to read but harder to write. And we as engineers tend to fall into passive voice. So write active voice as much as you can. And the Microsoft Word grammar checker catches that passive voice. So use that to help, and then just do the reword to make it easier, turn it into active voice. Sentence construction is certainly important. We've all done the misplaced modifiers, misplaced participles, that sort of thing, where we've actually changed the meaning of the sentence we wanted of our intention. So keep those in mind as well. And by the way, whenever I see that I've got a phrase out of whack early on in my writing, I fix it right away, because I'm always afraid that if I don't catch it now, that I'll miss it later. So those are one of the things that I will fix right away. Acronyms. They're part of our technical writing. We deal with acronyms. They're unavoidable. You're just gonna have to deal with that as a writer. Know your audience. It's always good to spell out first use, even if they're common acronyms. My preferred format is, like, for instance, Federal Aviation Administration, parentheses, FAA, and then blah, blah, blah. I see some documents where they'll talk about the Federal Aviation Administration and they won't show the acronym, but a page or two later, they'll talk about FAA. Well, if I'm not familiar with what that acronym is, now I've got to go hunt back and see what it means. So put it right beside on first use. Make sure that your acronym doesn't have multiple meanings. If it does, you need to explain that. And do the reader a favor, if your document is more than a few pages, or if you're using a lot of acronyms, put them in a glossary. That's as a list. That's really, here again, makes it is a real good thing for the reader. Use your word processor. Spelling and grammar check, they do a great job with that. As I talked about, they catch sentence length and structure, long sentences, wordiness, fragments, passive voice, and then readability. And I'm going to talk to you about readability, I think, on my next slide. So make it a habit to spell and grammar check all your writing. Include your presentation. If you have time, it's not, especially if you're sending an email to someone you don't know very well, good first impression, do a spell and grammar check on it also. Don't rely on your computer to catch everything. And it helps to proofread a printed copy. And I was talking to some high school students a year or two ago about technical writing. And I said, you know, I'm an old man. I'm used to reading. And so it's amazing how I find errors once I print it out. And these high school kids said the same thing. So you as college students may find the same thing, that, you know, my name could be misspelled on the computer, and I print it out and I'll see it. So if you can, proofread the printed copy before you go final with it. Okay, this is the slide with my lone equation, or equations, and this is part of Microsoft Word, the Flesch Writing Ease, and the Flesch Kincaid grade scale. I pay more attention to the grade scale because this one is easier for me to understand. But the key things to look at here are, what are the basis of the equation? Total words divided by total sentences. So that's how long your sentence is. Syllables divided by total words. So that's, am I using a lot of big words? Now we know we have to use a lot of big words. Aerodynamics, thermodynamics, experiment, multi-syllable words. We have to use those. So in our writing, don't make it worse by adding more multi-syllable words. For technical writing, I've found that 12th grade, if you can get 12th grade or less, you're doing a pretty good job. Because we have, by nature, we have long sentences and long words, it's going to be really hard to drive that number below about 12th grade. And I've checked the grade, the Kincaid grade level. I've taken the newspaper articles and run them through here. They come out 7th, 8th grade level, which is about right for today's newspapers. And a lot of technical reports where I'm scoring 12th grade or 13th grade. This is that paragraph, that long paragraph out of that Air Force report that I showed you a little while ago. When I ran it through the scale, it came out to be 12.8. So from a writing ease perspective, 12.8, that's pretty good. And there's what it is on the higher the higher the number here, the better. So if you get a real low number there, that means it's hard to read. And if you start getting up into 15th, 16th grade, you need to go back and rewrite that document because it's getting pretty hard to read. Okay, a few tips here as we wrap up. Your subject is complex. I said that at the outset, and I've said it a couple of times since. So write as simply as you can. Write for the benefit of the reader. Make it easy for the reader to comprehend what you're writing. Use those big words only when necessary. We know we're technical writers. We're going to have to use a lot of big words. Don't add to it. Keep your sentences short. Remember that 3 lines. If it's a 4-line sentence, it's too long. Same way with short paragraphs. Haven't talked about this yet, but show your data with graphs, charts, and tables, and then explain them. It also helps to create white space when you do that. The same way with drawings and photographs. You know, a picture's worth 1,000 words. That's so true. And then word processing, bullets and lists, don't be afraid to use those. Okay, writing is a reflection of you. You want to make it good, especially if it's got your name on it, and writing usually will. So you want to make it good. It's a reflection of you. It's not easy. Writing is still not easy for me. I'm a much better writer than I was 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, even 50 years ago when I was in college, for sure. So you need to be persistent. Planning and organizing. You don't neglect that. That's where you should spend a lot of your time, a lot of your free time when you're driving to and from school, to and from work. You're out for some exercise. That's when you can be planning and organizing. And then this loop of evaluating, edit, revise, and then that second set of eyes. Needless to say, you need to know your audience. I've talked quite a bit about that already. Keep it simple and avoid catchphrases. Remember your high school rules. Use the word processor, and always, always, always write professionally. Don't let your standards slip. That's why I suggest that you write as professionally as you can, even in your simple email. Okay, oral presentation. The reflection of you also, so make it good. This is a chance for you to stand out. Remember that. Same way with your formal writing, it's a chance for you to stand out. Plan and organize. Spend a lot of time up here. Keep your slides as simple as possible. Write, evaluate, edit, revise. You know, that's multiple times I go through my presentations, and I'm always tweaking something. Here again, use the power of word processing, including your spell checker. Keep plenty of space, white space on your slide. Here again, know your audience, and always speak professionally. Always speak professionally, because that can set yourself apart, because there are a lot of people out here today who don't do that. And practice, 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 practice before you give every presentation, and the more presentations you give, the better you will get at it. Okay, informal communication. Number 1, be a good listener. Here again, speak professionally. Just get in the habit of speaking professionally all the time. When the opportunity is right, which is more often than not these days, talk to people either over the phone or person to person rather than text or an email. And always do that for sensitive issues. Always do that for sensitive issues. Okay, my last slide. If you write well, present well, listen well, and speak well, you will be noticed and you will stand out. However, if you don't write very well, you have trouble with presenting, you're not a good listener, or you don't speak well, that will be noticed as well. So that's why I say communication is maybe the easiest way for you to stand out amongst your peers. And it's probably, you know, the easiest way for you to first make an impression is with your writing and your speaking. Okay, that's all I have. So if we've got some questions, I'd be more than happy to answer questions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Marv. That was great. We do have some questions here. Here's one that just came in. I have some experience writing an APA style, which strongly disfavors the use of pronouns as opposed to specific nouns and names. As I understand it, the reason for this is to reduce ambiguity. But when reading a technical paper that follows this style, it sometimes feels like this can quickly inflate sentences. For example, when the participants began the assessment, the participants, okay, so you're saying the participants, the participants, the participants over and over again. What are your thoughts on the use of pronouns in technical writing?
Well, you heard me say multiple times, make it easier for the reader to comprehend. So, to me, it would be okay to say they, as long as they know who they is. Now, so you have to be careful with that. However, if that's what your organization says, here's the way we're going to write, then you follow the rules. But I would say, here again, write like you would speak, and you wouldn't speak that way. Make it easy for the writer. So I'm not in favor of that. Years ago, this is back in the 90s, the government went to quote unquote plain English, and we were supposed to write our documents in plain English. And for technical documents, some documents were wonderful that way. Other documents were, and they were, so we did it in everything was Q&A format. It was, instead of stating something, you'd ask a question and you would answer the question. That's a good format for some situations, and it's a lousy format for others. And there are FAA documents out there that are harder to read because they were written in plain English. They went away from that fairly quickly because they realized that the technical writing, sometimes that just doesn't fit. I hope that answers the question.
Very good. I think so. Okay. How much communication is too much?
Rarely is there too much communication. I would say the most frequent too much communication is when you're talking yourself, where you're overdoing your conversation and you're maybe dominating the conversation. I don't think you can listen too much. I think we do too much talking and not enough listening. So that would be my short answer for that.
Okay. How is communication with the public different from internal communication within your organization?
Well, two things. First of all, if you're dealing with the public, it is probably a first impression sort of thing. Certainly, if you're doing a formal presentation to a conference, something like that. You have to be careful about company confidentiality, things like that when you're speaking with the public. So you've got to be more, make sure that you're politically correct and you're sensitive to saying things that are, out of bounds. Whereas internal communication, if you're a member of a team, that sort of thing, you want to keep it more informal. So I think that's the biggest thing. And I've done a lot of public speaking. I've spoken to a lot of, a lot of organizations, written for a lot of organizations. And I make sure that I want to be on my best behavior. And that's where practice is important, so that you don't slide off on some tangent, that you know what your points are and you stay on point.
Okay.
Be ready for questions. That answering questions from in public from the audience, that is another way that make or break you. Can I answer my questions? Do I admit that I don't know something? Keep your cool if somebody asks you a rather hot question or gets into a debate. I've seen people lose their cool that way. I have become enraged inside because somebody has taken offense to what I've said, but I've managed to keep my cool. And people have said, "Man, Marv, how did you put up with that person?" And it's like, well, I wanted to hit him over the head with a 2x4, believe me. So you need to keep your cool.
When is hitting reply all in an email too much?
Most of the time. I just stay away from that. You should be looking to see how many people are on there. And if it's one of those where there's 50 people on there, most of the time you don't want to do it. If it's your teammate and you're talking about a subject that is relevant to everybody, then reply all is absolutely appropriate. but stay away from the ones that are kind of more general in nature. Back years and years and years ago, I used to see somebody would inadvertently hit reply all, and then the next thing, somebody has replied all, complaining about the reply all, and then you get into an email fight that's copied to everybody, and it's ridiculous. I haven't seen that in many, many years. So be sensitive to that. That's a great question, because I know I still get emails. I really didn't need to do that, but I'm mostly retired now, so I've got the time. I can slog through them.
For oral presentations, what is the significance of nonverbal communication?
Oh, excellent point. And that's something that I didn't have time to talk about that much. I love to talk with my hands. And I think that brings out your personality, and you can be more expressive. And the other thing is, I hate being tied behind a podium. It's okay for a few minutes, but if I'm delivering a presentation, at a conference, I will step away from the podium so I can move around. It helps me relax a little bit. I think it helps me be more connected with the audience. I don't force it though. I see people who you can tell it's forced. Well, they'll get down and they'll walk into the audience. Sometimes it's forced, sometimes it's not, and I can pick up on that right away. I rarely do that, but I do like to move around. So that's part of that body language that helps. I think it helps. In my mind, it makes me become part of the audience, and so the audience is more inclined to listen to me because I'm part of them now. So body language is really important. Don't force it. Sometimes your gestures can be forced. Try to make it as natural as you can. And don't worry about flubbing up words here and there. That happens to everybody.
I have written papers and read and reread them and not seen any mistakes and submitted them, and then later found obvious mistakes that I don't know how I missed. Do you have any advice for this problem?
Well, second set of eyes. If it's your partner, your wife, certainly your teammates. As I mentioned, my name could be misspelled, and I've read that document over and over and over again, and I won't catch it. And if you're not printing them out, print it out, because that's the next way to catch obvious mistakes. Let it age. Let it age overnight. Put it away for a couple of days and come back to it. And like I said, this grammar guru told me she reads documents backwards to catch typos and misspelled words. And it's like, man, I tried it a time or two, and it's probably right, but that's not for me. But I think the best thing is second set of eyes and a piece of paper.
What should a resume communicate?
How good you are. It should reflect, obviously your education, your experience. And here again, you don't need to get too wordy with that. Try to keep your resume to one page and all those things. And Career Services does a great job for what the resumes are. But here again, people have very little time to read resumes. So you want the what's really special about me as an engineer. That's what you want to be able to have that jump off of that piece of paper. Or not a piece of paper anymore, I guess, or all that document that somebody's looking at on the computer.
Okay, and then the last two kind of go together. Do employers really look at private social media accounts, and does LinkedIn have value?
That's another good question. The advent of social media really came on board. I've been retired for 9+ years now. So you think back 9 years, social media was just beginning to take root. Yes, employers do that. I don't have any employees, but I'll go out and I'll snoop around people I don't know. I'll snoop around and take a look at that. I think LinkedIn is wonderful. I don't have LinkedIn. I have a website. Somebody wants to find me, they Google my name, boom, my website pops up. So I've not found a need to have LinkedIn. I've been invited. I decided not to go there. At this stage in my career, not to go there. I think it has great value, especially for networking and things like that. But here again, be careful what you put on there. Keep it 100% professional. Keep it 100% professional, and you can't go wrong. You can't go wrong with
Very good. Okay, well, that's it. It's 5 o'clock. We thank very much Marv for joining us and for the questions that we got and for everyone's attendance. We appreciate you being part of this Career Accelerator lecture series. We'd invite all of you back again for our next one. Share the series with your friends. Again, it'll be posted. The link will come out through Zoom, and then also it will be posted on the School of Engineering webpage in a few days.
Thanks
So
to everybody for putting up with me for 45 minutes to an hour. It's been my pleasure. It's been fun. Thanks, Bob.
Yep. Thanks again, Marv. Thanks everybody, and have a great evening.